Again, just with some blessings that the Lord has given to us over the past weeks. Much I like to say, our new sound system is great, but that wasn't the system. That was you. That was the group. That was just a real blessing for me. Thank you. That's why we come here tonight, to gather, just so we can just use what God's given us, which is song, and to warm our hearts, be exhorted, and then we can pray together. And what I'd like to do tonight, just to give an exhortation on something. I know initially it's going to, maybe there's a sound like, oh man, why do we always have to keep talking about this? Well, because this is what keeps us from our joy. And I want to show us what the Bible tells us, both from the Old and the New Testament, about something that starts off with David, who is considered a prophet. The book of Acts calls him a prophet. He was concerned about, when he wrote in Psalm 19, I'm going to give a passage from Psalm 19, a passage from Hebrews 3, and then just to finish off with what the Bible tells us for the Apostle John in 1 John chapter 1. And it's about a topic that relates to this morning's sermon, in that it is the very thing that will keep us from really embracing our assurance of salvation. It is the very thing that we have to see that we are fighting. We are not fighting all the externals that happen. We're not fighting Moabites, Ammonites, Romans. We're not fighting even fear of death or virus or riots or all those things that happen depending on which country you're in. No, we're fighting something else on a constant basis. And it's very individual. And it's that thing called sin. And I want to just show us what David prays about sin, very specifically, and how that relates then to the church in Jerusalem in the first century, and a warning that was given there, very concerning. And then how the Apostle John then leads off in his epistle to think that this is such an important thing that God's trying to explain to us, because it is coming between us and him. And that's the issue. It's not an issue of a measurement of whether you are obeying or not and what is your marks. That's our mindset. That's our broken, fallen mindset. Am I obeying? Am I not? And as I said this morning, then we tend to break it up into small sins because we have a small God and we don't feel very convicted. And once we do that, we have a very small view of salvation, a very small view of our security. Psalm 19, just to get to the latter part of this. We know Psalm 19. The heavens are declaring the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. He's describing how God, the majestic creator, creates. And verses 1 to 6 tell us that we should actually wonder about this God, how big this God is. Has created everything for our enjoyment and our good, and describes it. And then verse 7 goes into something even more detailed, something given to us from a more personal standpoint, something that is more personal from God to us, and that is the law of the Lord. It's words out of his own mouth. They're perfect, restoring the soul, verse 7 says. They're right, rejoicing the heart, verse 8. Clean, enduring forever, verse 9. So David is talking about how these words of truth are really helping us. They meet us where we are. But specifically, beginning in verse 10, he tells us, they're more desirable than gold, yes, than much fine gold. Words of truth can last beyond the currency of wealth and money. Sweeter also than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb. So he gives us these pictures that we should treasure this, but also verse 11, moreover, by them your servant is warned. There's a warning. Warnings aren't bad. They're only bad when we've already determined what our own way is. They're only bad when I already figured out what I want in my life. That's like when you've already determined the answer and then you ask your parents or you ask somebody for permission or advice and they give you something opposite, now you get angry. What do you mean? But in keeping them, there is great reward. David goes on and he defines two types of sins. Who can discern his errors? Acquit me of hidden faults. This is David understanding that his humanity, his growing up, he doesn't know everything. And he makes mistakes. Sometimes it's what we call our blind spots. I tend to forget things. I tend to be hard when I should be a little more soft. And he just says very clearly here, Lord, acquit me of hidden faults. Who can discern his errors? I can't know everything. I want to, but there's going to be a lot. If I go before you and you're going to show me how I'm not like one of your children, it's going to be bad. Please have mercy. Acquit me with that. But then he tells us something in verse 13, something we should all take to heart. Also, keep back. Notice he doesn't say acquit. Notice he doesn't say forgive me like he does. Forgive me of my hidden faults. Forgive me of my things that I'm not mature enough. I'm growing, but I just don't understand these things. I want to. And maybe I'm just really not thinking. I give up too easily. Acquit those. But verse 13, he doesn't say acquit here. He says keep back. Protect me. Lord, intervene somehow in my life. Keep back your servant from presumptuous sins. These are the big ones. Not the big ones we like to preach about, because those are safe. It's safe to talk about the sins of the world and go through just blatant liars and thieves and murderers and adulterers and homosexuals and all of those kinds of things. It's easy to set them up and knock them down. But those aren't presumptuous sins. They will be when you start small. Why does he want to keep back your servant from presumptuous sins? Well, let's first understand what a presumptuous sin is. It begins with the word presuming. I presume I'll be forgiven for this one. I presume that we'll be okay. I presume God will understand. I know it's a sin. It's not hidden faults. But I'm going to go ahead and speak these words, and I'm going to speak them in this way. I'm going to make this decision despite the consequences on people, myself, my family. I'm going to demand that I have a particular blessing or enjoyment despite some of the cost. It's more than made up later. See, a presumptuous sin is one that you know, here's a good word for it, premeditated sin. Keep your servant back from premeditated sins. This one's for all of us. This one is for your pastor. This one is for all of us, parents, and it's for our kids, young adults, people growing up in that. We make these decisions every day. We make them every day. We calculate. The Lord will forgive. I know I'm going to pray. It's really bad. I hate to say that I can speak from experience, but I do this to let you know that I'm not above you at all. That thought comes in your mind, well, I'll pray and ask forgiveness later and we'll be right. But I'm moving ahead. And so we put it out of our mind. We don't worry about it because we've already made the decision. That's a presumptuous sin. I want my rights. I need to be vindicated. I'll show you. I shouldn't have to hurt like this. I deserve that. They don't understand. Presumptuous sins. Now, why is David so concerned about presumptuous sins compared to hidden faults. I'll tell you why. He says right there in the second part of verse 13, let them not rule over me. You never, ever pay the extortionist when they come knocking at your door and says, you need to pay me or else I will. Why? Because they're never done coming to your door. That's why. You never make a deal with somebody who knows that you and they know that it's wrong, because they will now hold you to account and they'll keep coming. Let them not rule over me. David understands this. David is one we can even grab easy pictures. One that comes to mind so quickly is what? David and Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 12. It's not like he's caught himself in the bedroom with one of his mighty men's wife, and he gets up and he scratches his head, looks at himself in this mirror and goes, what in the world was I thinking? What am I doing here? How did that happen? No. As a matter of fact, just telling you the account in 2 Samuel 12, David sees her, but he didn't see her. He went looking for her. At a time when kings go to war, it's interesting, that time when kings go to war, we even hear it now in the news with what's going on in Afghanistan. One of the criticisms of the whole American withdrawal of Afghanistan is, why didn't you wait until the fighting season was over? You don't ever evacuate during fighting season. There's a season for it. Because after that season, everybody goes back to their families and they plant farms. You don't do something drastic during fighting season. See, there's a fighting season. David wasn't king leading his army in fighting season. He stayed home. And then one late afternoon, evening, he's got plenty of wives, plenty of children. It's not like he's losing in companionship, but he is walking around outside on top of his dwelling. And the word that's used there is walking around. Well, nobody walks around unless you're actually looking for something and you just don't want to tell anybody what you're looking for. What are you doing here? I'm walking around. No, I know. What are you doing here? We know that. What's on your mind? Tell me about this woman right over there. You'd think that he would know, because that's her house and she was the wife of Uriah the Hittite. His servants, his associates, they didn't say, well, let me go find out. David, it's this one. No, let me read you exactly what they say. It's so key that they're trying so hard to help their king. They're trying so hard. And 2 Samuel 11. And he's walking around outside. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing, and she's very beautiful. So he sent and inquired about her already. So he didn't just go, that's interesting. No. It's not like he's watching, kind of Israelite pornography. That's not his deal. No. What does he do? He inquires about her. I'm going to find out about this one. They came back, and one said, this is what they said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? You think they're trying to tell David something here? They're not just answering the request, are they? Is this not? David, are you kidding me? What are you doing? The daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, which, by the way, Eliam was the son of Ahithophel, David's great advisor. What does David say? Go get her. That's a presumptuous sin. That's a plan. David understood how that just ruined his life for a time. How about when he numbered the people? Joab saying, don't do this. This is against the law of Moses. Go, count the people. I need to know my army. I need to know the total of them. Just stay away from this. No, we're going to go ahead and do it until finally the Lord showed him, your pride is getting to you here. Presumptuous sin, he is premeditatedly wanting to do this, which is against the Lord, and they are ruling over him. You see, they've got you. The sin has you. You are committed. You're in debt. Now, does the sin care whether or not you look at God the way he is, and you look at him with he's amazing with holiness, and then I can understand the gift that he's given in his son, and I can rejoice in my salvation because of that, even though I've already made a deal with this sin that I'm going to allow it in my life. I want to employ it, ignorantly thinking I can control this sin. So many people across the world, mainly here, Indonesia, they try to raise a lion as a pet. I've seen that. So many have ended in tragedy. Why? You didn't think this was going to happen as the lion got bigger? You made a deal thinking, I'm in control. Let them not rule over me. If that's the case, then I'll be blameless, and I'll be acquitted of great transgression. David defines something here, premeditated sins. And the issue isn't that they're so bad, let's talk about them, how bad they are. The issue is they rule you, they've got you. And now you're angry because you cannot control the outcome. You cannot control your situation. And you're going to do what you're going to do because you're committed now. Knowing possibly it could lead in disaster, but that's it. I've made my decision. You've lined up. This was me so much when I was in high school, when I was in my varsity years and that. You're just so committed to what you want, committed to something that you know is off because you think that it's maybe restrictive. I think something that's off about God, so I'm going to do this, not realizing that I'm a slave. Let them not rule over you. That's what David says. And he's saying that on an individual standpoint. Now let's take that some thousands of years and go to the book of Hebrews, chapter 3, where we see thousands of years now in a New Testament setting, in the church, Jew and Gentile alike. The issue is this Jerusalem church in around AD 66 or so, just possibly months before the Roman siege of Jerusalem is going to take place. Somebody writes a letter to the church and notices some things are happening. And the church has become so Jewish that it is really rejoicing in its nationalism. The book of Hebrews, to put it in today's context, it's actually celebrating its nationalistic heritage. What do I mean by that? They're actually taking joy in just remembering and sometimes practicing and being part of Jewish sacrifices and worship rituals spelled out by the law of Moses, which all point to Christ, but none of them save. They point to the Messiah. Well, now the Messiah has come and he's been crucified and risen again, and going and you worship that, and they say, oh, but wasn't it nice when we did those things that made us stand out unique amongst the peoples? We had all kinds of sacrifices, washings, and all of this. And that's why he tells us in chapter 3, as he's building his case in his letter, to call the church essentially to focus on their Savior. Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. He was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was in his house. So in the same way that Moses was, Jesus was. Verse 5, now Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant. I mean, he began to build the tabernacle and establish the law for us. Yes, he's good. Verse 6, but Christ was faithful as a son over his house, whose house we are, if we hold fast our confidence and the boast of our hope firm until the end. They were being tempted to actually rejoice in the history of a pre-Messianic Israel and rejoice in getting favor with God by how they were behaving and what they were doing. This was really the great sin that was being addressed in the book of Hebrews. And I think there's actually something else here. I'll just tell you, I've heard one pastor say, and I think I agree with him. This letter was actually written to help address that issue in the church, but it was also written as kind of a signal to the church, you need to leave Jerusalem and leave pretty quickly. It's unhealthy to be here. It's an unhealthy surrounding. It's an unhealthy to be tied in with the Jewish people so much. It's dangerous for you. He keeps talking about going outside the camp. Go outside the camp. Get away from the... He says that throughout. But it's interesting, this letter was written just before the Roman siege came. And there were very few, if any, Christians killed in AD 70 in the Jerusalem wars. The church left. I think I said this the other day. They left to a place in Jordan. Because what? It was a complete destruction of the Jewish community. Don't hang on to that. And I think that's the overriding thing here in Hebrews. But he's telling us, consider Christ, consider Christ, consider Christ. And I want you to see what he says. This is what David was talking about. It's not just in those sins of selfishness that you want. It's also a sin that is, it's contrary to God, contrary to what you're hearing, but it's what you want to hear. That's a presumptuous sin. Verses 12 and 13. You should take heart to these verses here. Take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart. Boy, those are tough words. He's talking to church members here. He's talking to people who know the church. He's saying, be careful. An evil, unbelieving heart. Doesn't mean you're evil all the time, unbelieving all the time. Evil and unbelieving at any time. Any time. Because once it gets in, it rules over you. I remember I had a back operation in 1986. It was a double laminectomy. And I say that like I know what I'm talking about. I really don't, but I can sound really intelligent when I say that. But it's a disc operation. In 1986, before they had a bunch of stuff to look inside and tell you what's going on. It was a 5-hour operation. And out of that operation, they patched it together. I was doing okay, but then I got hurt and I had to have another op in 1988 to go back in and repair a disc that had again been damaged. Much quicker operation. But about 4 or 5 days after that, my back started to turn yellow and red and was very, very hot to the touch. Carol thought I was sleeping on like a heating pad or electric blanket. I said, no, I'm fine. She touches, whoa, that's hot. So we called the doctor. I said, oh, this is a big infection. Went in, they saw it immediately with staph infection. They had to operate right away. They cut me open and went all the way back down to my spine and left it open all the way to the ear. So my body was open all the way to the spine, which is in the middle of my body, because this infection came in. And in doing that, they were very concerned, such that the next time that I had an operation on my back, they had this in the records, they took me 2 days before and scrubbed me up and down. And then we're going to keep scrubbing and let you sit there until we go in. Why? Because we want to make sure nothing like this ever gets in again, because all has to get in is once. You see, doctors are so concerned. It's not about all the time they're just not taking care and never wear what they need to wear and all the time. No, they're very cautious, but they realize it can get in just this much. And if it gets in this much, disaster. I was being taken over by an infection that was very, very deadly. An evil, unbelieving heart. It just takes one evil, unbelieving heart for a moment. Just once. To not believe God is true, not believe God is worth it, to not believe the path that I'm going is actually the right path, and I need to give up my sinful hopes and desires that I've been planning on, my thinking that I got in control. That's an evil, unbelieving heart in that moment that can move to destruction. Notice what it does. What does an evil, unbelieving heart do? It falls away from the living God. Just for a moment. See, that's sin. Just for a moment. Hey, Dave, come here. Come here. Just come here. It's okay. God will still be there, okay? Come. That's the battle going on in your mind. Don't do that. Be careful. Why? Well, you fall away from the living God. So what do I do? What's the remedy? But encourage one another day after day, as long as it's still called today, which means we're not in heaven yet. So as long as it's called today, day after day, this is why you need each other. This is why we need each other so much. Why? Why should I encourage each other? Why is it important to WhatsApp? And why is it important to phone? Why is it important to see each other, physically touch and just be around? Why is it important? So that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. That's why. Sin is a deceiver. God is not as good as he said he is. Your life will not be as good as you think it would be if you follow God's course, but we have a different plan, don't we? Sure, come. Sin is a deceiver. Did God say you could not eat from any tree of the garden? Sin's a deceiver. It will not be a blessing to you, trust me. Sin is a deceiver. And once you believe that deceit at all, the Bible tells us right here, you become hardened. Once you believe your decision's the right one, you're on the right track, I know this is correct, advice is telling you otherwise, the Word of God is telling you otherwise, there's warning signs, but I really want this. Once you hear an opposition to what you've agreed to, which is by deceit, you will become hardened to that truth. This is why children, young adults have such difficulty with parents. Why? I've made up my mind on something different or opposed to what they want, and I'm going to do this. Okay, now I've decided, and it really isn't quite my decision yet, but I think it is somehow, and I'm deceived in thinking this is what's good. And so when the parents come and they say, no, based on what I'm seeing here, I think this is what's wise for you, now it's clash. Boom. Now it's clash. Hardened. I don't want to hear the truth. When Stephen preached in Acts chapter 6 and told them the history of Israel in his sermon, saying, I am not against the temple, I am not against the law, and here's what the nature of you people are, and there's your Messiah, and you crucified him. You know what they did? They plugged up their ears and were saying, nah, I can't hear you. And they picked up rocks and they stoned him. I will not hear you, I am hardened. That's what following a deceitful, presumptuous sin does. It hardens you to that still small voice that's saying, but wait, a kind voice, but wait, and you're hardened. This is what Scripture tells us the enemy we're against. This is why we fight. But there's one more thing before we go to prayer. I just want to show you the progression in 1 John. This is the progression that the Bible tells us here. Beginning in verse 6 to 10. John writes about this. Now, he's been an apostle probably some 60 years. Jesus is 30 years of ministry. He's 30 years old when he's becoming really a prophet of God. So we put that at AD 30, roughly. He writes the Epistle of 1 John roughly AD 90. He's been an apostle 60 years. He's seen a lot of churches. He's seen a lot of churches come and go. He has seen AD 70. He has seen the letter to the Hebrews. He's seen all of this. And right here, the very first part of his letter, as he talks about, in verse 4, these things we write so that our joy may be made complete. And this is the message we've heard from him and announced to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. God is true. God is light. He doesn't want any darkness for you. He doesn't want you to have a tough time. He doesn't want the worst for you. As we said, he's a giving God this morning. He really wants you to be blessed. He does so much, he blesses his enemies. And then we see a progression in verses 6, 8, and 10 right here. First, once you give in to a presumptuous sin and you allow your heart to be hardened by deceit, first thing that happens is you begin lying to cover yourself. If we say that we have fellowship with him and yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. We don't want to walk in transparency, see? Because I've already made a deal with something that's against God. I've got a presumptuous sin, and I walk in darkness, but I claim fellowship with Christ because I can't let that get out. I need people to know that I really am with them, but not really. I'm on this quest for my desire, this presumptuous sin. And so I lie. I'm a hypocrite. I don't practice, but I know the truth for sure. And you begin lying. Sin continues to work. If you're not meeting and talking and being with each other day after day, as the book of Hebrews tells us, encouraging, being transparent with one another, not being afraid to say, I'm struggling with this, not being afraid to approach somebody and say, I see that you appear to be struggling in a way, you appear to have some difficulty. Can I pray for you? I know it's tough. We're all in this together. We're not all called to be each other's judges and point people out. We're not each other's training coaches. We're brothers and sisters to say, I see something, can I help you? It's like we're prisoners of war all trying to get across to the other side, and we don't want to leave anybody behind. So we don't act like a training coach or a military disciplined person. No. We're all trying to get by across. This is what hurts when someone says, no, I'm good, I'm there. I say I have fellowship with you, but I walk in darkness. I've embraced this. What does that lead to? Verse 8. Well, if we say we have no sin, we're deceiving ourselves, and the truth is not in us. So when you live a lie enough, here's what comes. You start believing your own lie. This is always the joke now in the media and everybody. It's one thing to have, you give false advertising. Many people do that. Many companies do that, false advertising. But it's really bad when you believe your own advertising then. And that's what's happening. If you say, no, I haven't sinned. That's not a sin. I haven't done that. You're actually deceiving yourself. You're not lying anymore. You're actually deceiving yourself. You believe this is what's happening. But it doesn't stop there. Sin is not done until it takes you to death. And that's verse 10. If we say that we have not sinned, I've got nothing to worry about. I don't think I've sinned. I'm not a sinner. I'm a good person. Now we make God a liar, and his word is not in us. You actually move to where you say you call God's truth a lie. That's where it goes. It doesn't stop. Sin won't stop. This is why he tells us in chapter 2, and we'll end with this, verses 1 and 2. My little children, I'm writing these things to you so that you may not sin, which means sin's always going to be there. It's always going to be there. Just don't let it be presumptuous sins, whatever you can do. Whatever you do, sometimes it's sins of anger, sometimes it's sins that just come up, sins of impulse. Confess. 1 John 1:9, Understand what it is before God. You're before a very big God. So every sin is a big sin, no matter what it is. And be willing to confess and be made clean. I'm writing these things to you so you may not sin. And if anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. Remember the promise. We heard that. God sent his very Son, his very best, to demonstrate his love to you. And that's for all time. And he himself is the propitiation, the satisfaction for our sins, and not only for ours only, but also for those of the whole world. I mean, this is big, what he's given to us. He's saying, get your mind back on Christ. When you do sin, recognize who God is and who Christ is, the gift of taking care of that, and you're going to be clean and you can go. But do not treat this sin lightly, because this is how it owns you. It owns you. You begin thinking you're getting away with it. Then you actually begin thinking you're clever. And then you begin thinking God is really foolish. That's the path. That's what robs us of understanding Christ, our salvation, our wisdom. That is really an anatomy, really, of sin. Not to tell you, have you feel bad, to say, let's rally together and say, wow, we need to care for ourselves and each other. Because this is a big enemy that wants to keep us from our joy in having our eyes on Christ and seeing that God is a very, very big God. And I know our fear is we're going to be embarrassed. Oh no, I'm really feeling bad for myself. This is not for us to do that. This is for us to say, that is really a wicked enemy, and God has given us Christ to defeat that enemy. And I'm going to cling to Christ and look to that and hate sin. I just want to do that, but I have to do it every day because it keeps coming up. Sometimes we think of sin as those things we talk about that are easy to talk about, or you're trying to make a point and we say, stop doing that. No. I'm saying this is what we're dealt with. This is what we're faced with right here. Presumptuous sins. David knew it. The writers of Hebrew knew it. The Apostle John understood it right there very clearly. Because to fight that battle is to see extreme joy. Extreme joy with Christ and with each other. Because we understand what we face. That's our exhortation here. So we've got about 12 minutes. I think if we can just break up into some groups, maybe we can go just maybe 5 minutes after. And let's just take some time to pray. Just grab some folks and get in some small groups right there. I know we're kind of, because of our seating arrangement, we're kind of by family and all of that kind of thing. But let's just gather together. I will close us at 5 after 6:30. So 6:35, I'll close this to give us 15 minutes of prayer. So we went just a little bit over. We can get that. And I'll just, when I start praying, then we'll be done.